I was saying, get ready for an amazing presentation. He's doing some information called the Cram Cycle that he's mentioned to me a few times, and Dr. Goldhammer knows all about it. He's never talked about it before, so be ready. Shot me down. My husband shot me down. Oh no. Well, you know, Mary, what I would say is if you could have done it on your own, you might have already. So, you can't hear me? He turned the microphone on now. Is it on now? Let's see. You're welcome, Mary. Hi, Janice. Oh, Rebecca. Rebecca, you want to join Mastery? You'd be great at it. Rebecca said she wants to be on the panel next time. This is so cool. I wish I could really monitor this feed, but I'm kind of busy. But it's been a great conference, and we thank you for watching so much. All right. Got to introduce Dr. Lisle.
So you can have a maybe we'll work together.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, you are in for a real treat. This is the first time that this has been presented. So while we're getting everybody together, I just want to say, you know, the reason they have 31 flavors is because some people like chocolate better and some people like vanilla better. And Dr. Lisle and Dr. Goldhammer are very different, just like myself and Jean-Pierre are very different. We've also given you a new flavor this time, Dr. Saunders. But I want you to know that whichever one you resonate with, go with that one. Get a consult. Dr. Lisle and Dr. Saunders, they're psychologists. They can actually treat you through phone or Skype or in person. And even though this is the Ultimate Weight Loss Conference, Dr. Lisle actually works with a lot of other things other than weight loss. He's like the real deal. And I didn't go to Dr. Lisle to lose weight. I went to Dr. Lisle as a patient in January of 2011 because I couldn't get off psychiatric medicine. That's why I went to him. The weight loss was just a side effect of talking to him, basically. I mean, that's not why I went to True North. That maybe people don't understand that. It actually works beautiful for weight loss, but I went there to get off psych meds, and I couldn't get off the psych meds. I couldn't fast because I was on psych meds, and I talked to Dr. Lisle. And after suffering with severe panic disorder and agoraphobia for probably 11 years, and one of those years I didn't even leave my house, it was so bad. Literally in one session, I was almost better. And so he's not gonna like treat you for like years and years. It's amazing. Like a lot of times, 30-minute session, and that's all you need. Because I know somebody was telling me they have a daughter with panic disorder. I have it too. It got reawakened a few weeks ago because of a pit bull attack. So what do? You call him. I swear to God, there's really not very much he can't fix in the realm of mental, emotional, or physical problems. So he's the best. He's the smartest person I've ever met. And even Dr. Goldhammer said he was smarter than Dr. Goldhammer. So, and Dr. Goldhammer is always right. If he says Dr. Lisle's smarter, then he is. Smartest man we know in the plant-based movement, at least, Dr. Doug Lisle.
All right. This, I'm just a little embarrassed about this talk. The reason is I should have known this a long time ago, but I didn't. I remember reading a story about Steve Jobs, that I think he was being Steve Jobs, barefoot, running around Oregon, drops out of Reed College, decides to take a calligraphy course. And in things like that, that's how that guy buried IBM, okay? By being imaginative and open and sort of adventurous. And there was a course when I was in school that I didn't take that I was supposed to. So instead of knowing this information a long time ago, which would have been useful because the concepts were buried in what we call deep learning theory. And learning theory is not something, most psychologists learn a little bit about learning theory, but they don't become proficient in a lot of the details in it, and I did not. And the reason is because most applied learning theory is used in, for example, the treatment of severe autism, for example, or childhood behavior disorders. And I knew that I was never going to do that. I was interested in adults and the STEAM process and things of that nature. So I just didn't see the need for it. And also, most importantly, the professor was mean and gave bad grades. I said, no, I'm not doing it. So I didn't do it. I shied away from a class that turns out to be critical in understanding something that now I've been facing for a long time, and many people actually in the whole weight loss arena, all the minds that have been puzzled on this problem have been missing a clue that's been sitting in learning theory and we didn't know it was there. So this is the story of, this is putting together the story now from our perspective that we have enough information now to look back through this and see it. This is what I call the condition cram, and I think it's going to answer a lot of questions for you about yourself and your own ability to stay on a healthy track and the problems, the way you get off track. And it may also bring us a bunch of questions that you have after this. So this is a short, this is probably going to take us half an hour, and then we'll have the rest of the time to take Q&A. All right. There are, everybody knows what these are, of course. It's actually a sort of a strange picture because obviously that's a lion on the ground and a koala bear in the tree, and there are no lions, I don't think, in Australia. But the point is that there's three types of animals. There's going to be omnivores, carnivores, and herbivores. And typically herbivores, these are generalizations now, but herbivores basically don't cram. So if you're an herbivore, you wake up in the morning, if you're an antelope, and all you see is on the plains, and all you see is food. Food is everywhere. You're knee deep in food, and your job is to just get busy and chewing up this low density calories all day long because that's what you do for a living. If you're a carnivore, if you're that lion, your job is very different. You wake up in the morning and you do not see food all around you. You see challenges and difficulty and possible starvation. You are superbly equipped to not starve. But it will take you all week trying over and over and over again to finally make a kill. The big cats make about 1 kill a week, so they eat once a week. And when they eat, they cram. They cram everything that they can get in there, they cram. So that you can see what a dramatically different way of making a living this is. On the one part, you're just chewing and this low density calories all day long. And the other side, you make a kill and you cram very high density calories. Fantastical difference between these two survival strategies. Omnivores should be right in the middle. On the one hand, they should be disinterestedly chewing on low density calories, like a salad. And on the other hand, when they're into rich food, they ought to be very excited and determined in defending it and trying to cram it. And this is precisely how we see human beings behave. So human natural history has actually been the story of both circuits activated. That's what an omnivore is. We know from human natural history, humans are not vegetarians by nature, they are omnivores. And not only that, I know a lot of my friends in the vegetarian world don't like to hear this or they like to argue with it, but I'm just here to tell you that anybody that tells you that we are predominantly vegetarian is just flat out wrong. It isn't true. Now, it's from my perspective, it's the optimal thing to do for health, but it wasn't the optimal thing for our ancestors to do to make sure that they survived starvation. You know, if you were in a land where they have some good gas stations, but there's very few of them, and then there's some kind of dirty gas stations that aren't as good, if you're having to run this truck for a living, for goodness sakes, you've got to fill it up with some gas that isn't as good. You don't have a choice. And our ancestors didn't have a choice. A lot of animals have to eat food that is substandard. They have to do the best they can when it's available, and that's what our ancestors did. Our ancestors hunted, and they hunted in such a way that very often they were unsuccessful. So they might go 3, 4, 5, 6 days easily without any meat and be essentially just eating a pure vegan diet during those times, even as long as today we've got data from hunter-gatherer societies, about 175 of them around the world that have been under anthropological study, that they will go as long as a month without making a kill. Very often when a kill is made, the people in a village will each get a part of the meat, but most of what they're eating is plant food. But once in a while, the guys will bring down big game. And when they do, they cram. That is a time for the village to not only eat all the potatoes that were dug out of the ground and eat all the berries that were picked, but also cram in the animal food. Animal food would have been the highest calorie density food that would have routinely been eaten. Our ancestors all did get into some nuts and seeds, not that much. They got into some honey. Richard Wrangham, Harvard University, has told us that our ancestors might have eaten as much as 10% of their calories from honey, maybe, probably more like 5, which is very rich, 1,700 calories a pound type food, 1,800. But no, the most recurrent rich food that our ancestors ate was meat. And when they ate it very often, they crammed it in. We have evidence on our bodies of something that you won't see in other primates, the ability to store quite a lot of fat. You won't see that in other primates. That's because they don't need it, because they don't have high variance in their food supply the way that humans did, because humans are unusual in the sense that we have 2 sources of food, one of them low caloric density that is our staple, and then we have high density meat that we would have crammed in periodically. And so since you might go a long period of time without that meat, you better have an insurance policy to help you survive if it gets a little lean, and that's what human fat is. It's an insurance policy more than anything against hunting, a lack of successful hunting. Now, so you've got a circuit in there. And the way the circuit is built is it doesn't tell you to cram meat. What it tells you is when there's rich food, crammed in. Rich food. And now I want you to realize that what we've done with the modern food supply is meat in the natural world might have been 800 calories a pound, but a peanut butter sandwich is 2,000 calories a pound. So it's 2.5 times the calorie density of the food that circuit was built for to get excited about. So this is now what you're going to see. That human beings have the capacity to eat to satiation. But if there's rich food left over in the environment, cram it in. Go right past normal satiety. Our ancestors would have done this periodically, maybe once a month. That's all that ever would have happened, because they couldn't do it routinely. Now we're going to look at something else. Everybody knows who this is, of course.
Freud.
Freud is not a bad guess. You got the right time, but notice the name.
Kizika? It looks like a...
You got it. Pavlov, yes. I don't know if that's Pavlov in Russian. That's what Russian looks like to me. All right. Yes, this is Pavlov. And now this is the deep learning theory that we're going to look at. So Pavlov was a brilliant physiologist in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And he was the master in the world of studying digestive process, ironically enough. And so he was getting thwarted in studying salivation and some other gastric or other digestive reflexes, because every time he walked in the lab and he wanted to look at a dog's mouth, that dog was already salivating. And he wanted to see it from the start, and he couldn't see it. And the reason why, he figured out that the dogs had associated him with the food. And so he tried to sneak in the laboratory before they could hear him, so he could sneak up on him and see. It never worked. And so finally it dawned on him one day, wait a second, this is important. No one has ever thought this thing through before about what we're going to call, essentially, this is modern learning theory. This is how association works in the brain. And so Pavlov turns this from a frustration to actually a brilliant set of research, and this research is partially responsible for him winning the Nobel Prize. And so this is what he finds. Let's take a look at this now. So what we're going to see is this is a very simple Pavlovian experiment where what we're going to do with the dog is every time we're going to feed the dog, we're going to ring a bell and then we're going to hand the dog food. So over and over again, we're going to do this. So Pavlov essentially wanted to get control over the dog's salivation. So he figured that if the dog can be associating him with the food, the dog should be able to associate something else with the food. So that therefore Pavlov can run around the laboratory and not be causing the dog to salivate, and that because if he always only feeds him when he rings the bell, he will condition the dog to the bell as opposed to himself. So Pavlov does this, and so we're looking at the very first conditioning trial. We're going to see that the dog's not going to be salivating when you ring the bell because he doesn't know Dog doesn't know, he or she doesn't know anything about what's going on. But by the second trial, remember the first trial, we rang the bell and fed the dog. So by the second trial, a little part of the neural circuits in that dog starts suspecting that when you ring the bell, there might be food. So there's a little bit of salivation. And then look at the third trial, it's going up. And then the fourth trial, it's going up some more. And so by the time we do a whole bunch of these trials, every time we ring the bell and give the dog food, pretty soon we can ring the bell and the dog's going to be salivating. Because the dog, is anticipating that this is going to be what happened. This is going to be called, this is what we call conditioning. And so this is the beginning of a huge research program from Pavlov that would be extended by many, many people over the next century. We're going to learn a lot of things. Now we're going to leave Pavlov for a minute, and we're going to skip forward 80 years to a brilliant psychologist, experimental psychologist by the name of Shepard Siegel, who's now at McMaster's in Canada. So I heard Dr. Siegel speak in the 1980s, and he told a story of his research that stuck in my mind for 30 years, and it's a good thing that it did, because it's what helped me with this problem. So what Siegel was interested in was he was interested in heroin overdoses. And heroin overdoses didn't make any sense. Heroin addicts are very knowledgeable about heroin. They also they're always in trouble for money. There's never enough heroin. So they have to be really smart about it. They're sure as heck not going to use too much. And so Siegel was looking at this thinking, this somehow doesn't make sense. So he pulls autopsies and he finds out that the amount of heroin in the bloodstream apparently is low after people have died. Now this really doesn't make any sense. Now there aren't very many people in the world that could have figured out what this guy figures out, but he does. That's because he was obviously steeped in learning theories, experimental psychologist. This is how this guy thinks. He thinks like a modern day Pavlovian master. And this is the thinking that he goes through. He has some updates to be thinking through Pavlovian conditioning from a slightly different angle. Instead of thinking of reflexes the way Pavlov thought. So Pavlov figures there's a reflex for digestion, you present food and you get a reflex, and then you can condition that reflex with the bell. So we call it conditioned reflexes, and that's what we learned in school. Siegel comes along and says, don't think of them as reflexes, because it's not just reflexes. We're going to call these compensatory responses. That, of course, if you present a dog with food, it's having what we would call reflexes. That's not the best way to think of it. Think of the animal as being in a state of homeostasis or balance. The food is going to knock it out of balance, and it's going to have a compensatory response to deal with the food, which happens to be digestive reflexes. But it's going to turn out that anytime we knock the organism out of homeostasis, it's going to have a compensatory response, and it may not be a reflex. So for example, if you work in a cooler every day, so you go into this cooler every day at 9 o'clock. The first time you go in there, you'll go in there with your parka and it'll be cold. But the second time, you'll start to condition and your temperature is going to start to rise before you get there as you open the door of the cooler. And the third day, it's going to be more. And the fourth day, it's going to be more. And by the time you've been there for a few weeks, even as you drive into the parking lot, your temperature is starting to rise. That's not a reflex. That's a compensatory response. The same thing is going to be true. These guys that get jumped in mountain lakes, and swim in the morning in freezing water, that's what that is. They have a condition or they have a compensatory response that gets them ready. It turns out that the immune system can actually be conditioned to deal with assaults from the outside. It can actually get ready and know. So now what we're going to find out is that heroin addiction or any other addiction, the first time the person uses heroin, it rocks them off of their homeostasis. It's a tremendous blast to the entire brain. And so the brain knows that it has been knocked completely off kilter. So the second time it uses, the brain starts to engineer a compensatory response. So the compensatory response is designed to neutralize and deactivate the heroin. That's what its job is. So as you can see, if you use then you're going to get the compensatory response. And use again, it's going to get better. And use again, and it's going to get better. In fact, it's going to get so good that what's going to happen is that the person's not even going to be able to feel it. So they're going to use more. Okay? So they're going to use more, and then what's going to happen? The system is going to increase its compensatory response. And they're going to use more, and it's going to increase the compensatory response. So what is happening is opponent processes are going on here. But while the opponent processes are being built, what's going to happen is that if the organism, or when I say the organism, the person, the thing is going to be done in any animal. If you build up a compensatory response, the compensatory response will become what we're going to call conditioned. And that is that it's so important to have a compensatory response that the creature is going to be smart, and it's going to be looking for cues in the environment, just like Pavlov's dogs got smart about listening for that bell. And so it's going to be the case that in the case of a heroin addict, their brain is going to know when they get the little spoon and the needle out and start fiddling that they're about to get a dose of heroin. So therefore, they have to have a compensatory response ready to meet it, you see. So what we're going to wind up is not just a compensatory response, but a conditioned compensatory response. So this creature gets ready, and it's anticipating this problem. Now, what's going to happen next is as follows. Suppose the heroin addict is fiddling around with the needle and the spoon, and there's no heroin. What happens now? What happens now is we get the conditioned compensatory response, but no drug. That feeling is very, very uncomfortable. There's tremendous neurological products in the system that are essentially ready to deactivate heroin, and there they sit. Shepard-Siegel told us, folks, that feeling is what we call craving. Craving is a conditioned compensatory response. That is very important to this story, right? So the next thing that Siegel says is as follows, and this is the mystery that he solves. It was just one of these sheer strokes of genius. He says, if you have a conditioned organism, like a person, to heroin addiction, and they've got a high dose, and what we do is they're conditioned to a certain time of day in little techniques, the little spoon or the little needle. And then they're always used to using it at night, say. And then one morning they wake up and they walk the streets and they run into a friend, and that friend's got some heroin and says, hey man, you want to use it in my car? And they go and use it in the car, but there's a problem. Hasn't used it in that situation before. And so there might not be a sufficient conditioned compensatory response activated, and the person uses the heroin without the response, and they're dead. That's how you get death by heroin overdose. By a creature that when we look at their bloodstream, they don't really have that much heroin in it, not any more than they were used to using at any other time. This is why we believe people like River Phoenix died in his car. Probably wasn't used to using heroin in his car. For some reason he did, and we got a problem. So Shepard-Siegel, this is great work. That's all I can say. And it's coming on the back of a deep understanding of learning theory. And so we've learned a few things. We learned about conditioned compensatory responses, and we learned about craving, and that's important. Now we're going to look at the problem of our lives. Here it is right here. This is going to be what we're going to call an extinction curve. This is a straight Pavlovian extinction curve. So this time we're going to do the very same thing that we did before. We have a dog and food and bell, except this time we're going to ring the bell, but we're not going to give them food. So this trial now, trial number 1, is now the very first trial after we banged the bell 30 times and fed the dog. So the dog is fully having a what? Conditioned compensatory response. And that compensatory response, Pavlov would have called a reflex, but we're not going to call it a reflex. We're going to call it a conditioned compensatory response that happens to result to craving for food. Okay. So this dog's craving food, and he's craving it at a pretty high level. He's a 10 level of conditioning. So he's fully expecting it, and he's craving the food, and he's whining, and he's upset, and we're not going to give him the food. Now what happens next is interesting, because the next day comes, and we ring the bell again. And you might think that the next day, because he didn't get food on day one, first extinction trial, that on the second it would go down, but it doesn't, folks, it goes up. And the day after that, it's going to go up even higher. It's going to go up in this rise here that we call the extinction burst. And the reason why this is true is because the structure of value in nature is that if you had an asset like food that kept coming, and then it didn't come, then it's very likely that that asset is very close to you, that you just have to work harder to get it. It's very close, okay? So this is going to be why crazy boyfriends will stalk their ex-girlfriends and drive them crazy. It's because they've been conditioned and they expect that resource, and when they get cut off, they have an extinction burst and they have tremendous energy because they are very close to reestablishing that relationship. And if they are just ferocious enough, maybe they get it back. Okay? So this is exactly what's happening. This dog will whine and yelp way more than it did before. Okay? Through a period of time before, essentially, the nervous system runs a cost-benefit analysis and says, wow, I think this asset's gone. At which point it starts to actually decline. Now, so this is, you know, I've been through this with my cats, by the way, and I wasn't even paying any attention. So these cats, I got one of them that wakes me up in the morning, like pawing my face. I finally said, enough already. I'm throwing you guys out of the room. And of course, what happens? 6 a.m., pawing under the door, squawking, raising cane. Okay, then like a fool, because I'm soft-hearted, you know, I let them in. Oh, great. Now what did I do? I have an extinction burst, and then I reinforced it like an idiot. And then what? Then it gets higher. Okay, so then they get more tenacious. That's exactly how that's going to work. So eventually, once I figured this out, I just got tough on this, you know, the cat. And there's only one of them. The other one's good. I got the good one. All right. So you get through an extinction burst. Even if you get through the extinction burst, what's going to happen? Now you're starting to go into extinction. So now essentially this dog is going to start to realize that the bell does not mean food. So it's not going to have as big of a response. It's looking statistically less and less likely. We're headed to extinction. The cravings are much less now. Now, however, there's a problem lurking out here. And that is for no reason at all. It'll come right up like that. That's called spontaneous recovery. Those kinds of those were noticed by Pavlov more than 100 years ago, and he didn't know why. Okay, but now think about the structure of value in nature. Think about some little creature some little bird, and there's a river, and at a bend in the river, it wanders over there one day, and there's a whole bunch of these worms. And it just starts nailing these worms, and it's all excited about it. And then the next day, it wakes up in the morning, and it's feeling, it's got a memory that says, hey, we gotta head over there where those worms are. So it heads over there, no worms. That's a little puzzling. Then it comes back at 2 o'clock, no worms. Wanders over there at 4 o'clock, there's worms. Okay. So the next day, wanders over there a couple times, makes sure it wanders over there at 4 o'clock for some reason. It just has an impulse. Okay. 20 days later, this animal isn't even thinking about going over there until about 4 o'clock, but at 4 o'clock, at about 5 before, it spontaneously feels a craving to stop doing what it is over on the other side of the river, and it spontaneously heads over to this area of the river where the worms are. That's conditioning. That's how this thing is built. Now, it doesn't know why, it just has this feeling. Now, as it goes over there, what's going to happen is, day after day, it's going to do this. And then one day, suddenly, it goes over there and there's no worms. So what's going to happen? No, it's not very happy about it. It's pretty upset. It's got a bunch of digestive enzymes that are kicking around. It's like, hey, where are you? Comes back the next day. You better believe he's back the next day. And you know what? Now he's getting ferocious. He's scratching around in the mud, getting his little paws all messed up. It's like, hey, they've got to be here somewhere. The next day, he's got his beak in it. Like, you know, he's beak deep in mud. These worms have got to be here. That's the extinction burst. It's exactly the right way you would design an organism, to not give up on some value that would be super valuable. Now, this eventually it'll come down. Oops, eventually it's going to come down because it's not worth it. The system is running cost-benefit analysis and it's realizing, you know what? I don't think there's any worms there. Pretty soon he starts forgetting. But every once in a while, every week, suddenly gets a spontaneous feeling that it's maybe a good idea to go over there at 4 o'clock and just check and see if those worms are there. It's a good idea, folks. There's a reason they were there in the first place, and maybe someday they're going to be back. So that is a spontaneous recovery. And now what happens if he hits those, what if there's worms there? Go right back up. It's exactly how you would design the system. You think that if I let those cats, like I go through the extinction birth with the cats, I'm a ruthless owner. No way you're not coming in. I'm not making a peep of a sound. I'm not even letting you know you've even woken me up. Okay? Just going to step on them like, no way. I'm not getting up. Right? So we go through 7 or 8 extinction bursts over a couple of months. And then what happens? In one day, I get these soft hearted. And now what do I got? A nightmare is what I've got. It's exactly how this would work. Folks, here's the problem. We're designed by nature to cram if there's rich food in the environment, even after you're completely full. So if that's true, then what's going to happen is you're designed to cram. You're doing the right thing as far as your psychology is concerned. That's exactly the right thing. And instead of cramming on bacon and eggs or cramming on chocolate cheesecake, we're thinking, oh, no, I'm going to be good, and I'm going to cram on cashews and raisins. And is it better? Of course, it's much better. But what is it? It's rich food. It's, in fact, richer than the meat that we were designed to cram in the first place. So is it rewarding to the system? Yes, it is. So we cram it in, feels like we did the right thing. But the problem is, instead of doing this once a month, we're doing it every day. And if you do this every day after dinner, which is usually when it happens, what happens is then you classically condition it. You condition the Cram circuit, and incredibly what's going to happen is the cue that will tell you that it's time to cram is going to be a full stomach.
Wow. Uh-oh, we're screwed.
Full stomach will be the best cue that you have. Literally, a full stomach is ringing the Pavlovian bell and is saying, you are about to, in the next hour, circle back around to the pantry and open it up and find out whatever rich food is in this environment and cram it in. That's how you'd be designed. So that is the Cram circuit. That's what I see over and over again. I've been talking to people about this for the last 4 or 5 months. I see it all the time. I would say it's 50% of the phone calls that I get in my phone consult business over the last 4 or 5 months have been Cram circuit, Cram circuit, Cram circuit. Some of you are here, you've already heard this before. Of course this is what it is. Now, I didn't see it because Alan and I were so overwhelmed by the pleasure trap. The pleasure trap is clearly an obvious major force in this problem. But you add this to this is a shadow problem that isn't easily seen. And so this is, I believe that, actually I know, that we become classically conditioned to our own Cram circuit being repetitively activated. And as a result, we are facing the extinction curve. And not only that, even if you fight yourself and get through the extinction curve, which I think is probably about a week for this particular problem, if this was heroin, for example, the extinction burst is going to be phenomenal. Okay, you're talking about a whole different kettle of fish. You're talking about something that basically can't be beat. Okay? I mean, a few people would beat it, but it's extremely rare for anybody to beat them. But this, we can beat. A lot of people have beat it. A lot of you have beat it. And then what has happened is you actually got down through here to extinction, and then we got a spontaneous recovery. And then if you reinforce a spontaneous recovery, you're back up halfway up the learning curve. Uh-oh, now we're in trouble. okay? Now, a lot of times I think that you can even hit this once in a while and be okay, but here's a serious problem. Thanksgiving. I didn't understand this for a long time. Alan and I would talk to people, they'd say, I was doing so well, I was doing well for 7 months, and then I went to Thanksgiving and everything went sideways. I'm like, wow, is the pleasure trap really that bad? I mean, really? A piece of pumpkin pie and some stuffing? Is that enough to derail the taste neuroadaptation? Is that possible? And I was sure it wasn't true. And you know what? It isn't true. It isn't the taste neuroadaptation that gets into trouble at Thanksgiving, it's the Cram Circuit. The problem is that if you've been doing a good job and then you cram, and then you cram the next day and you cram the next day because there's leftovers, now we've reinforced the spontaneous recovery process 3 or 4 times in a row, and now we're back in deep trouble. Now, suddenly at night, even though you've eaten all the healthy food, now you've got that little Cram Circuit, and what you feel, folks, when the Cram Circuit, when this is activated, is craving. You're craving. You don't even know you're full, but you're craving anyway. You don't even know why. It doesn't make any sense. But this is what's happening. All right. Turns out that if you don't reinforce a spontaneous recovery, the subsequent little spikes get less and less. You're looking at another part of the addiction process here. That this is what's going on with addiction. If you're a cigarette smoker, you become fully conditioned to cigarettes. You have a conditioned compensatory response to deactivate the nicotine. If you don't get the nicotine, you're feeling what? That feels a little bit different than hunger, doesn't it? It's a little different. Just as if it's morphine, all these conditioned compensatory responses have a different feeling. With respect to food, it's expecting food. The digestive system is getting ready for more food. So this is what's happening here. But if it's a cigarette, now we're fully conditioned. Now you take the cigarettes away, what do they feel? Extinction burst. They're really frustrated. That's several days. Okay. Then they start to go into extinction. But then a lot of times they'll have spontaneous recoveries, and then they'll relapse. So it's going to turn out that the average cigarette smoker will take, if they ever quit, the ones that are successful, it's on the 8th major attempt. That means, I didn't know what that means until now. Now I know. It means that they got through the extinction burst 8 times. They were right down here. They were almost home free, but they got trapped by spontaneous recovery and then got beat again. What an incredible trap that is. When you look at this thing, it's almost unbelievable. You're thinking, oh my gosh, this is like if the devil himself was to engineer something for a problem, this is what it would look like. But when you realize what we're really looking at, you're really looking at the most brilliant survival apparatus that you can imagine. Because what this was all about was making sure you got enough food. It was about being so sensitive to rewards with a dopamine reward system that you were always triangulated on the best rewards possible. And then you got really good at anticipating the conditions where those would happen. And you always put yourself in position to get those. And when you couldn't get them, you throw a tantrum. And you try to make sure you got them back. And then if you couldn't, you'd go back and visit every now and then just to see. See? That's how you would build a system as brilliantly as possible, and that's what nature did. Now, I'm on a one-man crusade, along, of course, a few other people. But my one-man crusade is to try to tell people, no, the reason why you're struggling with these problems and why they're difficult isn't because you got problems with your mother or your father or your sister or your brother or your uncle or issues in your past. Those issues are issues, and there were problems, and sometimes people have been abused, and they've had difficult things happen to them, and that is true. I'm not discounting any of that. I'm just saying that's not the reason for this problem. Could it be partially contributing? Maybe. But in science, we have a concept called proportionate variance explained. If you're trying to figure out why one thing is causing something else, you can actually figure out what. You can use very sophisticated analysis at times to figure out what portion of it, what portion of heart disease is a result of cigarette smoking as opposed to diet. You can actually figure these things out. And so when we step back and look at the amount of forces that are actually acting against us, it's unbelievable. Here's what they are. We begin with the pleasure trap. That's the one we were most aware of. This is the taste neuroadaptation. This is how you're designed by nature to be seeking out the richest possible caloric resources, and you're rewarded with dopamine to tell you that you just did the right thing. And then once you get used to the overly rich foods, it's hard to eat natural foods. See? That's a big enough trap. That can swallow up the whole problem all by itself. But now we're going to add something else to the pleasure trap. What happened when I talked about two other things, energy conservation. So now we have an environment that not only has super normal foods, but it also has them really convenient, really easy, and really cheap. Uh-oh. Now we're really in trouble. Now we're going to do something else. Turns out we're a social creature, and everybody gets their social points by giving everybody into the pleasure trap. So now you start saying, no, I don't want your food, and oh, would you like mine? And everybody says, you don't want my food, and I definitely don't want your food. It's a social disaster. And we add that problem. I thought that's all there was. And then a few years later, I realized, wait a second, we got this problem called the ego trap. That when we set a goal, as hard as this goal is to defeat this, a lot of times we set it too high and people are overwhelmed and they kick over the table. It's like, oh, got that problem too. It's like, oh, okay, then what? Oh, it turns out we got something else called a conditioned Cram Circuit. And then it turns out we have an extinction burst. So even after we condition the Cram Circuit, it isn't like we just started getting out of the Cram Circuit and it gets easier and easier. No, we got to go through an extinction burst. And it's going to get twice as bad before it gets better. And then it's like, oh, well, great, I got through the extinction burst, I got through the ego trap, I got through the pleasure trap, I got through the energy conservation, I got through the social pressure, and what do I got now? A spontaneous recovery craving. Okay? See where we are, folks? Hard. This is what I said. This problem is way underestimated. And if you have struggled, please don't blame you. You were never designed to solve this problem. You were designed to solve exactly the opposite problem. The problem you were designed for is to make sure you got every scrap of rich tasting food in the environment that you can get your hands on, and whenever you got it, you're supposed to cram it in. That is your design. You see? You're going exactly opposite of that design in an environment that's just going to mousetrap you if you wiggle 1 inch. That's what it is. So now we see this. This is why I have this crusade. I don't want people feeling when they're so lonely and struggling and frustrated with themselves and so upset with themselves, and then they're looking inward, like maybe there's something wrong with me, and they've had hard things happen, and they talk to a counselor, and they join some group, and turns out everybody's commiserating about these horrible things in the past, hoping that maybe the horrible things in the past are causing the bad girl, bad boy behavior in the present. It's like, no, they're not related. These are these are these, and these are that. Okay? And that's why our message is you got to work harder on your environment than you do on yourself.
Amen.
Because your environment is what's doing this to you. It's not you. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. By the way, interesting study that I wish was done before we read the pleasure trap. It wasn't. It was done 6 years after. I love this when I read it. Turns out, to show you how hard the pleasure trap is all by itself, some investigators threw a bunch of standard American food in a rat cage for a month and let these rats eat whatever they wanted. They took out their healthy rat chow. At the end of the month, this is a really cool experiment. They pulled all that food out, they put the healthy rat chow back in. They sat there and watched them. Those rats didn't eat for 14 days. 14 days. The little guy right there, you can't tell because it's not blown up, but he's making a gesture. Yeah, we're not eating. Folks, that's component number 1 of the pleasure trap. There's 6 more, okay? So please, that's why you're here. That's why you're learning. Some of you, in your sort of moments of supposed sanity, say, wait a second, aren't I just obsessing about this too much? Am I just overdoing this? Am I ODing on the information? It's like, Maybe, and maybe you need to come in and come back and come in and come back to give yourself a break from time to time. But I've got to tell you, this is a tough one. It takes a lot of information, it takes a lot of learning, it takes a lot of failure, it takes a lot of trials, it takes a lot of fortitude. And then, if you can get through, get yourself into an extinction curve, and do a really good job at maintaining, keeping it in a good balance, you can wind up beating this thing, and really beating it for good, in the same way that you'll see cigarette smokers and alcoholics beat things for good. And we just put it quietly in the background, and you have yourself a healthy, trim body and healthy body, and then that's how you wind up with the life you deserve. All right? Thank you. Okay, we got time for a few questions.
We have time for about 15 minutes worth of questions, but you have one that
Yes.
you've already submitted that was supposed to go to the
Yes.
panel. Would you like to read
Yeah, I'll
that
read
one
that
first?
one.
And then if you guys have questions, good.
Yes. How does one let go of the pain, disappointment, and even anger towards a lifelong partner who chooses not to pursue better health? This situation drives a physical, emotional, and even financial wedge in our relationship. This is hard. And again, there's a lot of little pieces to this, and everybody's situation is a little bit different. And I would say all we can do is we can do our part of this very well. And if we do our part of this very well, we've got a chance to make things better. We want to make, at the most fundamental level, a partner has to be a really good friend. And when we have a situation like this, we have a problem that it's so easy for one person to start doing something better and the other person feeling left behind. And then the resentment and sabotage that will come here can get pretty ferocious. And so in cases like this, a good maxim is to realize we have to make friendship a fine art. And one of the arts to friendship is to go more than halfway. We have to be willing to go more than halfway with a person that is on the other side of this and is struggling. They just look obstinate and they look sabotaging and they look angry, etc. That's what it looks like to us. But really what they are is they're very deeply embarrassed. Even the toughest He-Man that's like, oh, I don't care. No, they do. They care. They don't like the feeling that you're looking down on them. They don't like the feeling that they're being left behind. And they want to pull you into the swamp with them because they want to maintain a pure set of esteem process between the two of you. And if you're not going to do that, you know that you're fighting for your own life. A part of you is going to be deeply resentful that they're actually sabotaging you instead of joining you. And but the problem is that you've made it your thing and it's not theirs. They're second. They're Johnny-come-lately. They're the second guy that found out about something. That's not a good feeling. So we have to make the friendship and the relationship a fine art. We have to go more than halfway. We've got to be very accepting of their own journey, and we have to signal to them the reasons why it is that we actually value and love them. Okay? We have to do that, and we have to dial that up more than you even want to, because what has happened in this question is the esteem dynamic, which optimally in a good relationship is I'm loving and valuing you, and I'm signaling that, and you're signaling it back, and it's like this. That's a positive esteem dynamic. That's what we call a virtuous cycle. But esteem dynamics can go exactly the other way. That where, in fact, if you're devaluing me, then I'm devaluing you back. And this is where things go exactly the opposite direction. And these cycles can essentially be so self-reinforcing that they can stay in these dynamics for very long periods of time. The way to shift the dynamic is for you to take the first step forward. Okay? If you grit your teeth and shift the esteem dynamic, you consciously and deliberately push it in a forward direction where we signal to the person, in fact, I call it flood the circuit. We flood them with everything that we value and love and respect about them. We can sometimes literally shift the gear and jam the gear into a positive direction. It can be a tremendous relief. On my website at steamdynamics.org, there's a lot of about 20 or 25 little audio clips that I do. And in one of those audio clips, I think one of them is called Flood the Circuit, or about relationships. They're only about 5 or 10 minutes long. And if you listen to these, I describe this process in detail. It's exactly the process that I go in if I have a couple that comes into me in therapy. Usually, they are in a negative, or what I call a vicious cycle. That, let me tell you about how bad he is and what he did, and then let me tell you about why it is that she's wrong, and they're going that direction. My job is to cause them to actually force them to go the other direction, and when I do this, the relief and success behind this is just huge. Okay, we need to jam the car in a different gear. Okay, that's how we do it. All right, got time for a couple more questions.
Sharon had a follow-up question where children are involved.
Yes.
Hi, Dr. Lisle. I help a lot of people in the UWL group and in my own personal coaching practice where the families want to move in this direction. Oftentimes it's the wife, but sometimes it's the husband,
right,
who come to me because they are committed to this way of eating and they want their children to eat this way. The problem is that the spouse is resistant. The spouse wants to continue eating the way that they're eating,
right,
and bringing the unhealthy food into the home, sending a mixed signal to the children.
right.
So what would be your advice for getting the spouses on board?
What I want to do with children is I want to put exactly one stake in the ground. There's only one thing I'm interested in with children, and that's the dairy proteins. That's the only thing I care about. I don't care about butter, and I don't care about Coca-Cola. I don't care about steak. I don't care about hamburgers. Some people might be saying, oh my God, those are terrible things. No, they're not such terrible things. The truth is that the average person staggers to their 80th birthday in the United States. They manage, the body's so incredible, it will spin straw into gold. The biggest thing that those children have to be worried about is being starved to death. They're designed by nature to be able to turn unbelievably what we would consider lousy food into perfectly good tissue. Now, it's not as good as eating healthy. And they would live a little bit longer. They didn't. Now, the truth is that you're not going to impact any kid's life expectancy in the first 15, 20 years of their life with what they eat, hardly at all. We know this because we can see that the most important variable in life expectancy is going to be cardiovascular disease. And I can talk to my buddy Caldwell Esselstyn, and we can take somebody that's got one foot on a banana and the other one in the grave, and we can actually drag that person back from the grave at 77 years old with 3 stents in their heart. So believe me, some kid that's been fed a lot of lousy food in their first 18 years is fine. I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about one thing, which is dairy products, and I'm worried about dairy products because of their suspicious association between dairy products and autoimmune disease. So I want to make sure that some kid doesn't wind up with lupus, or doesn't wind up with type 1 diabetes, or doesn't wind up with MS, but they don't wind up mousetrapped by something that they're going to fight their whole lives unnecessarily, that we might have been able to avoid. So I want the mothers, or maybe in some cases the father, but you're right. Women are a lot more interested in nutrition than men are just in general. That's because they're mothers. They're very interested in nutrition. It's just it appears to be a natural difference. And so it's usually the mom, and usually the mom, if they're talking to me, they're always hyper-conscientious. That's who you people are. Okay? They're always hyper-conscientious, and therefore they're very worried about their children's health. And my attitude is, boy, all you got to do is let's get the dairy products out, get a lot of healthy food in, and just back off essentially the criticism that we're sending by this kind of stance to the spouse. The spouse can dig in and be very difficult to deal with, but if we essentially bend in this way, and we save the only thing that matters, which is we're making sure that we are not sending that kid into trouble behind an autoimmune disease. We worry about the rest later, and we got plenty of time to fix it. Okay? So I would send that person to, I would essentially make a deal with the spouse that all I want, if you will just read, for example, the chapters from the China study that are associated with autoimmune disease and dairy, That's all you want them to read. After that, you'll shut up, or we want a discussion about that, and you will let go everything else. That's a deal that I would make, and I would take it, and then I'd get peace and rest. Okay. All right, maybe time for one more.
Okay. I'm a little curious. Do you think it's the conditioned Cram Circuit and the extinction burst and the spontaneous recovery cravings that tends to make us think that we're emotionally eating? Is that the thing?
Very good question. Yes, I do. I do. I think that's a major issue. In other words, when you are, if you've now eaten, you've been a good solid citizen all day long, just like you'd expect an omnivore who would be designed by nature to actually be eating raw, fresh plant food all day long, nibbling fairly uninterestedly at low-calorie dense foods. Finally, nightfall comes and we cook. So we know that this is the pattern of human nature. So the women have been gathering actually the dense carbohydrates that they're going to cook that we can't eat raw. So that's going to be high-density calories that are going to have everybody survive, essentially expecting that the men probably haven't hunted anything successfully. So that's what we're basically going to live on. Now, and then what we're going to do is periodically we're going to have meat added to this. So it's going to be this big bonus that we're going to store as a little extra fat for the next month when we don't get any. But now we move to the modern environment and we move to that circuit, the Cram Circuit, that now is happening every night. So now what we wind up is we wind up with a classically conditioned Cram Circuit that the very best cue that we're about to cram isn't the fact that we look at the food in the freezer. That's not the best cue. The best cue is your own stomach. The best cue is the fact that your stomach is distended and it's nighttime. It's like, well, that means it's very likely that we're about to cram, right? So now what do you feel? What you feel is kind of bored, and yet you sort of also know that you shouldn't be eating this food because you're trying to lose weight. So now you're kind of upset about that, but on the other hand, you're going to try to justify it. And so this mind starts swirling all around, and the problem is it keeps coming back to the same conclusion, that there is no better use of your body than to chew up a bunch of high-density calories. Why? Because it's the most ancient circuit that there is. So now you have in your four-brain bundle information saying, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. And you're going to do it anyway. So you think that that might make a human being upset? And guess what? Upset and not know why. Okay? So they're not going to have access to understanding what the dynamics are that are driving this. This is going to cause anxiety, depression, shame, everything else under the sun. And we're going to do it anyway. Why? Because you got a Pavlovian circuit that's in withdrawal, and it's expecting you to cram that 500 calories worth of rich food in there. And if you don't do it, it's going to be upset. It's going to be scratching at your door. That's why. Make sense? All right, we're out of time. Thank you very much for the